Sometimes the biggest mistake in your life is simply sitting in the wrong chair. And sometimes, that mistake becomes the only reason your heart finally finds its way home. The soft murmur of conversations drifted through the elegant downtown Chicago restaurant like a quiet melody. Crystal glasses caught the glow of warm amber lights, and polished silverware chimed softly against porcelain as servers glided effortlessly between tables. Every corner whispered success, confidence, and old money. Claire Bennett paused just outside the entrance, her reflection staring back from the tall glass doors. She smoothed the wrinkles from her pale blue secondhand dress for what felt like the 10th time. The fabric looked nice from a distance, but she knew the tiny stitched repair near the hem was impossible to hide if someone looked closely enough. She adjusted a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, took one slow breath, and forced herself to smile. "You promised Olivia," she whispered. "One dinner. That's all." Her best friend had insisted this blind date could be different. Claire wasn't convinced. Between working double shifts at a neighborhood cafe and spending every spare evening illustrating children's books that no publisher had agreed to print, dating had never seemed like a priority. Still, maybe tonight would surprise her. She stepped inside, immediately surrounded by the comforting scent of fresh bread, grilled steak, and expensive wine. A hostess greeted her with a warm smile before pointing toward the dining room. Claire glanced down at the message on her phone one last time. Table 12, 7 o'clock. His name is Ryan. He's wearing a navy jacket. Her heartbeat quickened as she quietly counted the tables while weaving through the restaurant. 10, 11, 12. There he was. A man sat alone beneath the soft glow of a hanging light, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blazer. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, and one hand rested beside a leather wallet while the other scrolled casually across his phone. He looked calm, almost too calm. Claire swallowed her nerves, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward him before she could lose her courage. "Hi, you must be Ryan." The man slowly looked up. Clear blue eyes met hers with quiet surprise. For the briefest moment, he seemed ready to say something, but the words never came. Claire offered an awkward smile and extended her hand. "I'm Claire. It's nice to finally meet you." Ethan Carter blinked once. Just seconds earlier, his business dinner had disappeared with a short text message from an investor whose flight had been delayed until morning. He had been debating whether to leave when the nervous young woman appeared out of nowhere. He noticed the uncertainty in her smile, the tiny paint stain near one fingernail, the inexpensive purse she held a little too tightly, and the way she kept shifting her weight as though she expected to be told she didn't belong there. She looked nothing like the people who usually asked to have dinner with him. They normally recognized him before he even reached the table. She clearly didn't. Ethan almost corrected her. He almost said, "I'm not Ryan." But something stopped him. Maybe it was the relief of seeing someone who wasn't pretending to impress him. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion from living every conversation behind the invisible wall built by his last name. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Please," he said gently. "Have a seat." Claire's shoulders relaxed immediately. "Thank goodness." She laughed softly as she sat down. "I was terrified I'd embarrass myself tonight." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Why would you think that?" She gave a nervous shrug. "Blind dates are weird, aren't they? Two strangers pretending they're completely normal while secretly wondering how quickly they can escape." Ethan couldn't help smiling. "That sounds surprisingly accurate." She laughed again, this time more naturally. "See? Olivia told me you were quiet, so I figured I'd probably end up talking too much." "And are you?" Ethan asked. Claire looked down at her menu before smiling sheepishly. "Definitely. It's what I do when I'm nervous." "Then maybe I'll let you." The waiter arrived with 2 menus before asking whether they would like sparkling or still water. Claire hesitated for a split second before quietly choosing still water, unaware that Ethan noticed the tiny pause. He noticed everything. Not because she was pretending to be someone else, but because she wasn't pretending at all. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the Chicago skyline as evening settled over the streets. Inside, neither of them realized that one empty chair, one simple misunderstanding, and one ordinary dinner had already begun changing 2 lives forever. Dinner settled into an easy rhythm neither of them had expected. Claire folded her napkin into a neat square before smiling apologetically. "I should warn you. I ask a lot of questions when I am nervous." Ethan rested his glass on the table. That sounds fair. I can answer a few. She tilted her head with genuine curiosity. So, Olivia only told me that you worked in technology. That could mean almost anything these days. Do you build apps? Design software? Fix computers? Ethan chuckled quietly. Something like that. Claire laughed. That is the most mysterious answer I have ever heard. Maybe I like a little mystery. Or maybe you just do not enjoy talking about work. Ethan considered the question for a moment. That is probably closer to the truth. Claire nodded as though she completely understood. I get that. People always ask where I work, but nobody asks what I actually love doing. Ethan leaned forward slightly. What do you love doing? Her face brightened instantly. Drawing. She answered so quickly that it almost surprised even her. Ever since I was little, I draw people, neighborhoods, bookstores, dogs in parks, anything that makes life feel real. She searched for the right word before smiling. Beautiful, I guess. Are you an illustrator? I hope to be. She laughed softly. Right now I am mostly a waitress who spends too much money on sketchbooks. Ethan noticed the tiny embarrassment that followed the joke. You make it sound like a bad investment. It is when rent is due. She smiled anyway. But I cannot stop. Every paycheck, I tell myself I will save more money. Then I walk past an art supply store, and somehow another sketchbook follows me home. Ethan found himself laughing harder than he had expected. It was not a polished laugh meant for boardrooms or charity galas. It was genuine. That sounds dangerous. Extremely. Claire reached into her canvas tote bag that rested beside her chair. Actually, she hesitated before pulling out a weathered sketchbook with curled edges. I take it almost everywhere. Ethan looked at the worn cover. It had clearly traveled with her for years. She carefully opened a few pages. Small pencil sketches filled nearly every sheet. An elderly man reading on a train. A little boy flying a kite by Lake Michigan. A woman laughing while carrying groceries. A tired bus driver sipping coffee before sunrise. None of the drawings were perfect, but every face carried warmth. Every expression seemed alive. Ethan studied each page longer than he realized. You notice people? Claire looked surprised. What do you mean? Most artists draw what something looks like. You seem to draw how someone feels. For a moment, she simply stared at him. It was the first time anyone had described her work that way. Nobody has ever said that before. It is true. She slowly closed the sketchbook. Thank you. A comfortable silence settled between them. It did not feel awkward. Outside, headlights drifted across the rain-speckled windows, while soft piano music floated through the restaurant. Ethan realized he had almost forgotten where he was. He had attended hundreds of expensive dinners over the years. Most of them blurred together into endless conversations about acquisitions, investments, quarterly reports, and market projections. Tonight, nobody had asked him about stock prices. Nobody had complimented his watch. Nobody had hinted at business opportunities. Claire looked at him the same way she had looked at the bus driver in her sketchbook. Simply as another person with a story worth hearing. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. What made you choose technology? Ethan paused longer this time. The honest answer involved inheritance, billion-dollar mergers, and thousands of employees spread across several states. Instead, he smiled gently. I always liked solving problems. That makes sense. Does it? Yes. She folded her hands together. You listen before you answer. People who solve problems usually do. Ethan felt an unexpected weight settle quietly inside him. She had reached a conclusion about his character using nothing except one dinner and a handful of conversations. If she learned who he really was, would she still see the same man? Before he could stop himself, he asked, would it matter if I had a different job? Claire frowned with honest confusion. Why would it? Some people think careers tell you everything about someone. She shook her head almost immediately. Not me. A job pays the bills. Character tells you who comes home after work. Ethan looked down at the untouched piece of bread on his plate. It was such a simple sentence, yet it landed with more force than any speech he had heard in years. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan Carter wished he had introduced himself with his real name. Yet for reasons even he could not explain, he remained silent, wondering how much longer this unexpected evening could stay untouched by the truth. The waiter cleared away the dinner plates, but neither Claire nor Ethan seemed ready for the evening to end. The conversation had wandered from childhood memories to favorite books, from quiet dreams to the little moments that made ordinary days worth remembering. Time had slipped past unnoticed until Claire glanced toward the large clock above the wine display and gasped softly. Oh no. Ethan looked up. What is it? She laughed, covering her face for a second. I have been talking for almost 2 hours. You noticed? She smiled. You are making fun of me. Only a little. Claire shook her head with an embarrassed grin. You should have stopped me. I did not want to. His answer came so naturally that both of them paused. A faint blush colored Claire's cheeks before she looked down at the table. The silence that followed was different now. Warmer. More comfortable. The waiter returned with the check folder and quietly placed it beside Ethan. Claire instinctively reached for her purse. We should split it. Ethan gently slid the folder toward himself. Please. Let me. Ryan, no. She smiled politely. I asked half the questions. That means I owe at least half the bill. Ethan laughed. Is that how blind dates work? I think fairness works that way. Then let me be unfair this once. Claire studied him for a moment before finally giving in with a small sigh. Fine. But next time, coffee is on me. The words escaped before she could think about them. Her eyes widened slightly. I mean, if there is a next time. Ethan looked directly at her. I would like there to be. Claire smiled so sincerely that Ethan felt something inside him soften. They stepped outside together a few minutes later. The Chicago air carried the cool freshness that followed a light evening rain. Streetlights reflected across damp sidewalks while taxis rolled quietly past. The city seemed slower now, wrapped in golden light and the distant sound of traffic. Claire pulled her light cardigan closer around her shoulders. I always forget how chilly it gets after sunset. Ethan glanced toward her, but resisted the instinct to call his driver waiting 2 blocks away. Instead, he matched her pace as they began walking toward the elevated train station. Do you always take the train home? Almost always. Do you like it? She laughed. Not during rush hour. Then she looked up at the glowing skyline. But late at night, everyone gets quiet. It feels like the whole city finally exhales. Ethan followed her gaze. He had lived in Chicago for years, yet he could not remember the last time he had walked these streets without security, schedules, or meetings pulling him somewhere else. They passed a street musician playing an old acoustic guitar beneath an awning. Claire slowed immediately. She stood listening with a gentle smile while a handful of pedestrians continued past without noticing. When the song ended, she reached into her purse and found a single $5 bill. She folded it carefully before placing it inside the musician's open guitar case. Thank you, the older man said warmly. You made my night. Claire smiled. No, you made mine. As they continued walking, Ethan finally asked, Do you always do things like that? Like what? Helping strangers. She shrugged as though the answer were obvious. He gave everyone 5 minutes of beautiful music. $5 seemed like a fair trade. Ethan remained quiet. He knew people who donated millions of dollars because their accountants recommended it. Claire had just given away money she probably needed more than the musician did without expecting recognition, photographs, or tax benefits. They reached a small bridge overlooking the Chicago River. Claire rested her hands lightly against the railing. The water reflected ribbons of gold and silver beneath the city lights. This is my favorite place, she admitted. Whenever life gets noisy, I come here. Ethan stood beside her. Why here? Because the river never pretends to be anything else. She smiled toward the moving water. Some days it looks beautiful. Some days it looks messy. But it just keeps moving. Ethan quietly repeated her words in his mind. They felt strangely personal. Claire opened her canvas bag and pulled out her sketchbook once again. Do not move. Ethan laughed. Should I be worried? Only if you blink too much. She quickly began sketching with practiced confidence. Her pencil moved lightly across the page while she occasionally looked up at him. Ethan watched her instead. The way she narrowed one eye while concentrating. The loose strand of blonde hair that kept falling across her face. The tiny smile that appeared whenever she was completely absorbed in drawing. After several minutes, she closed the sketchbook before he could see the page. Finished already? Almost. She hugged it lightly against her chest. Maybe I will show you someday. Ethan smiled. I will hold you to that. Neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan waiting quietly on the opposite side of the street, nor the concerned glance from Ethan's longtime driver, who had spent nearly 3 hours wondering why one of the busiest men in America had forgotten every appointment on tomorrow's calendar because of a woman who still believed she had shared nothing more than an ordinary dinner with an ordinary man. Claire barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Ethan's calm smile beneath the warm restaurant lights and the strange feeling that she had known him much longer than a single evening. By morning, she laughed at herself while tying on her cafe apron. "You had one dinner," she whispered. "Do not make it into a movie." The breakfast rush quickly pulled her back into reality. Coffee cups clinked across the counter. Regular customers asked for the same orders they had requested for years, and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the little neighborhood cafe. Claire moved from table to table with practiced efficiency, greeting everyone with the same genuine warmth she had shown Ethan. Around 10:30, her phone buzzed quietly inside her apron pocket. During a brief break, she slipped into the hallway and unlocked the screen. A message appeared from an unfamiliar number. "I hope your morning is less busy than your evening. Thank you for making dinner unexpectedly memorable. Ethan." Claire stared at the screen in confusion before smiling to herself. "Ethan, not Ryan." She laughed softly. So that explains it. Instead of feeling upset, she found the mistake oddly amusing. She quickly typed back, "I was beginning to think I imagined the whole evening. Nice to officially meet you, Ethan." Less than a minute later, another message appeared. "Coffee this Saturday? I believe you still owe me one." Claire smiled so brightly that one of her co-workers peeked around the corner. "Good news." "Maybe," Claire answered, slipping her phone away before anyone could tease her. Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze drifting through Millennium Park. Instead of choosing an expensive restaurant, Ethan suggested a small neighborhood coffee shop tucked between an old bookstore and a family-owned bakery. Claire noticed immediately. "You really like places nobody talks about." Ethan looked around the cozy cafe with its worn wooden tables and handwritten chalkboard menu. "The best places usually do not need advertising." Claire laughed. "That sounds like something my grandfather used to say." They ordered coffee and shared a warm blueberry muffin before wandering through the nearby farmer's market. Claire stopped almost every few minutes to admire handmade pottery, watercolor paintings, fresh flowers, or musicians performing on the sidewalk. Ethan found himself enjoying her curiosity more than anything they actually bought. At one booth, an elderly woman sold handmade bookmarks painted with tiny landscapes. Claire spent several minutes admiring them before quietly choosing one with a watercolor lighthouse. "Do you read a lot?" Ethan asked. "Every night." She smiled. "Books are cheaper than vacations." Ethan laughed. "I have never heard that before." "It is true. You can travel almost anywhere for $15 if you find the right novel." As they continued walking, Claire suddenly stopped beside a small art supply store. Through the front window, colorful sketchbooks filled an entire display shelf. She pressed her hands lightly against the glass like a child outside a toy store. "This place is dangerous," she admitted. "For your wallet?" "Very dangerous." Ethan smiled. "Go inside." "No." She laughed, pulling herself away. "Rent comes before sketchbooks." Ethan respected the answer more than she realized. She wanted things, but she understood priorities. They spent the afternoon sitting beneath a large oak tree overlooking the park. Families tossed frisbees across the grass, while children chased bubbles floating through the warm spring air. Claire opened her familiar sketchbook once again. "Today you can look," she said. Ethan watched quietly as she turned several pages before stopping at the newest drawing. It was him standing beside the river on the bridge from 2 nights earlier. She had captured the thoughtful expression in his eyes with remarkable detail, while the city lights reflected softly behind him. Ethan stared at the sketch longer than he expected. "I look happier." Claire studied the drawing herself before answering. "That is because you were." Ethan looked toward her. "You can tell that from one evening?" "Sometimes." She shrugged gently. "People smile with their mouths all the time. Their eyes are much harder to fool." Her words lingered in the quiet afternoon air. Ethan felt the familiar weight of his secret settle heavily on his shoulders once again. Twice already he had almost told her everything. Twice he had watched the opportunity disappear because he feared what would happen afterward. His phone suddenly vibrated inside his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen for only a second before quickly silencing it. 12 missed calls. 3 urgent messages from his executive assistant. An emergency board meeting had been moved forward after unexpected international negotiations. Claire noticed the brief flicker of concern crossing his face. "Everything okay?" Ethan forced a reassuring smile. "Just work." She nodded without pressing further. Then promise me something. What? When you are with me, do not spend the whole day worrying about tomorrow. Ethan smiled softly. That sounds difficult. Claire closed her sketchbook and looked out across the park. The best moments usually disappear while we are busy thinking about the next one. Ethan quietly slipped the phone back into his pocket without answering a single message, unaware that every minute he postponed the truth made the distance between honesty and heartbreak just a little greater. Nearly 2 weeks passed, and what had begun as an accidental dinner quietly became part of their routines. Ethan found reasons to call after work, and Claire found herself smiling every time his name appeared on her phone. They met for simple lunches, wandered through bookstores, watched sailboats drift across Lake Michigan, and laughed over slices of pizza that cost less than either of them expected. Ethan realized those ordinary afternoons meant more to him than the most exclusive dinners he had ever attended. Claire, meanwhile, still believed she had met a thoughtful man who happened to work somewhere in technology. She never searched his name online. She never asked about his salary, his apartment, or the company where he worked. Somehow, those details never seemed important. One Thursday afternoon, Claire's cafe manager approached her while she was wiping down the front counter. Claire, one of our catering clients just called. They need an extra server tomorrow night for a charity gala downtown. It pays triple your normal shift. Interested? Claire hesitated for only a moment. Triple. They are desperate. Half their temporary staff canceled. Claire smiled. Then I am in. She texted Ethan that evening. I have to work tomorrow night, so I cannot make dinner. Ethan read the message while sitting in the back of his car after another board meeting. His smile slowly disappeared. Tomorrow night's charity gala was his foundation's largest annual fundraising event. He had spent months preparing for it. He stared at the phone for several long seconds before typing carefully. No problem at all. Work comes first. Good luck tomorrow. His thumb hovered above the screen as he considered adding one more sentence. I will actually be there. He deleted the words before pressing send. Maybe he could explain everything before she noticed. Maybe there would be a quiet moment after the speeches. Maybe everything would still be all right. The following evening, Claire stepped into the grand ballroom of the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, wearing a neatly pressed black catering uniform. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous room, while elegant floral arrangements decorated every table. Wealthy donors, business executives, and community leaders filled the ballroom with polished conversations and effortless confidence. Claire quietly reminded herself to focus on serving drinks and stay out of everyone's way. She balanced a silver tray as she moved gracefully between tables, occasionally admiring the breathtaking decorations. This place looks like something from an old movie, she whispered to another server. The woman beside her laughed. Wait until the guest of honor arrives. Everyone says he is one of the biggest philanthropists in the country. Claire smiled politely without paying much attention. To her, every guest looked equally important. Across the ballroom, Ethan adjusted the collar of his tailored tuxedo while his executive assistant reviewed the evening schedule one final time. The press interviews begin in 20 minutes. Then the keynote speech, followed by the scholarship announcement. Ethan nodded distractedly, but his eyes kept searching the room. Suddenly he saw her. Claire was carrying a tray of sparkling water toward the west side of the ballroom. She looked exactly the same as she always had, except now she seemed wonderfully out of place among the glittering gowns and expensive suits. Ethan instinctively took one step toward her before stopping himself. This was not how he had wanted the truth to unfold. Before he could reach her, the ballroom lights slowly dimmed. Soft music faded as a spotlight illuminated the stage. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Claire turned toward the stage along with everyone else, balancing her tray comfortably against one hand. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another unforgettable evening supporting education, medical research, and community development. Tonight would not be possible without the vision of one extraordinary leader. Claire barely listened while adjusting the glasses on her tray. Please join me in welcoming the founder of the Carter Foundation, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Carter Dynamics, one of the youngest billionaires in America, Mr. Ethan Carter. Applause exploded throughout the ballroom. Hundreds of guests immediately rose to their feet. Claire's fingers froze around the silver tray. Her heartbeat seemed to stop as she slowly lifted her eyes toward the stage. Ethan stepped into the spotlight wearing the same gentle expression she knew so well, but now every television camera in the room followed him. Giant screens suspended above the ballroom displayed his face beside bold gold letters that filled the room. Ethan Carter, founder, chairman, billionaire. Claire stared without blinking. The room around her dissolved into distant echoes. Every vague answer, every missed phone call, every carefully avoided conversation about work suddenly fit together with painful clarity. He had never been an ordinary man. He had simply allowed her to believe he was. Claire could no longer hear the applause. The crystal chandeliers, the elegant ballroom, the smiling faces around her all blurred into a distant haze as one thought echoed through her mind. Ethan Carter, founder, chairman, billionaire. The man standing beneath the spotlight was the same man who had laughed over inexpensive pizza, admired her sketches beneath an oak tree, and listened as though every ordinary story she told mattered. Yet he was also someone she had never truly known. A nearby server gently touched her arm. "Claire, are you okay?" She forced herself to nod. "Yes, I just need a minute." Carefully placing her silver tray onto a nearby service station, she slipped quietly through a side doorway into the empty hallway beyond the ballroom. The sudden silence felt almost overwhelming after the applause inside. She leaned against the cool marble wall and closed her eyes. Every conversation replayed itself with painful clarity. "I work in technology. I like solving problems." Some people think careers tell you everything about someone. They had never been lies, but they had never been the truth either. Inside the ballroom, Ethan barely heard the opening lines of his own speech. His eyes remained fixed on the side exit where Claire had disappeared only moments earlier. His carefully prepared remarks suddenly felt meaningless. After thanking the audience and making the shortest speech anyone could remember him giving, he handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies before quietly stepping away from the stage. His assistant hurried after him. "Sir, the press conference starts in 5 minutes." Ethan kept walking. "Reschedule it. The national networks are waiting. Then they can keep waiting." He pushed open the ballroom doors and entered the quiet hallway just as Claire wiped away a tear she had not realized had escaped. She looked up slowly. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Ethan stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "Claire." His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. She managed a small, tired smile that never reached her eyes. "So, this is what you meant by technology." Ethan lowered his head. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" she asked gently. "Tonight." He did not answer immediately. That silence became answer enough. Claire folded her arms, not because she was angry, but because she suddenly felt cold. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Ethan looked at her with quiet regret. "You think it is because I found out you are rich." She shook her head almost immediately. "No." Her voice remained calm, almost heartbreakingly so. "I would have gone to dinner with Ethan Carter the billionaire if you had asked." She looked directly into his eyes. "But I cannot stop wondering why Ethan Carter believed he had to hide from me." Ethan struggled to find the right words. "Because almost everyone treats me differently after they know who I am." Claire listened without interrupting. "Some people see opportunities. Some see money. Some see headlines instead of a person." He exhaled slowly. "When you sat at the wrong table, you looked at me like none of that existed. I did not want to lose that." Claire nodded faintly. "So you decided to protect yourself?" "Yes. By taking away my choice." The sentence landed with quiet force. Ethan opened his mouth, but found no argument. She was right. Claire looked down at her hands before speaking again. "Every time I asked about your work, you chose another half answer. Every time I trusted you a little more, you gave me a little less of yourself." Ethan stepped forward instinctively before stopping. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know." She smiled sadly. "That is what makes this so difficult." A long silence settled between them. From inside the ballroom came distant applause as another speaker took the stage. Life continued only a few yards away while their own small world quietly came apart. Claire reached into her canvas bag and removed the sketchbook she carried everywhere. She looked at the worn cover for a moment before holding it against her chest. "Do you remember asking if you could see this someday?" Ethan nodded. "I remember. There are pages filled with drawings of you." Her voice trembled slightly. "Not because you were important. Not because you were successful." She looked into his eyes one final time. "Because I thought you were the kindest, ordinary man I had ever met." Ethan felt his heart sink. Claire slowly stepped backward toward the hallway exit. Maybe that man was real. She offered one final, bittersweet smile. I just do not know which part of him I was actually falling in love with. Before Ethan could say another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone beneath the quiet hallway lights, finally understanding that the greatest distance between two people is not measured in miles or money, but in the truth left unspoken. The following Monday, Ethan arrived at Carter Dynamics before sunrise, yet the towering glass headquarters felt emptier than it ever had. Executives filled the conference room, quarterly reports covered the massive screen, and billions of dollars in decisions waited for his signature, but his thoughts never left the woman who had quietly walked away from him 3 nights earlier. Halfway through the meeting, one of the vice presidents proudly announced record profits. The room erupted in applause. Ethan barely reacted. He simply closed the presentation folder and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the waking Chicago skyline. Let us continue this tomorrow, he said calmly before standing. The executives exchanged puzzled glances. Meetings with Ethan Carter never ended early. Meanwhile, Claire threw herself into work with determined energy. She accepted extra shifts at the cafe, spent fewer hours drawing, and politely ignored every message Ethan sent. There were no dramatic texts, no desperate explanations, only simple words that appeared every morning. I hope you have a good day. I am sorry. I should have trusted you. She read each message exactly once before quietly putting her phone away. She could not bring herself to block his number, but she could not answer it either. Late one afternoon, after the cafe finally emptied, Claire sat alone by the front window with her sketchbook resting unopened on the table. Her manager, Mrs. Donnelly, noticed immediately. You have not drawn in almost a week. Claire forced a smile. I have just been busy. Mrs. Donnelly gently tapped the worn sketchbook. That little book has followed you to work for 2 years. Busy never stopped you before. Claire looked down without answering. After Mrs. Donnelly returned to the kitchen, she slowly opened the sketchbook. Page after page revealed Ethan exactly as she remembered him. Ethan laughing over coffee. Ethan watching sailboats on the lake. Ethan standing quietly on the bridge beneath the city lights. Then she reached the final page she had never shown him. Beneath the finished portrait, she had written only one sentence. The kindest man I have ever met. A tear landed softly beside the words, smudging the edge of the graphite. She quickly closed the book before anyone noticed. Across town, Ethan sat alone inside his penthouse apartment, something he had rarely done before. The city glittered beneath him, but the spectacular view no longer held his attention. His eyes settled instead on a small paper bag resting on the dining table. Inside lay the watercolor bookmark Claire had purchased at the farmer's market for $4. She had laughed when she gave it to him. Now you have to finish at least one novel. It was probably the least expensive gift anyone had ever given him. It was also the only one he kept on display. He opened the novel she had recommended weeks earlier. The bookmark slipped gently onto the table, revealing a folded receipt tucked inside. Claire had scribbled a tiny note on the back without telling him. Every good story deserves an honest ending. Ethan read the sentence again and again until its meaning became impossible to ignore. He had spent his entire life solving impossible business problems by writing larger checks, hiring smarter people, or negotiating better deals. None of those things could repair a broken promise. The next morning, instead of attending another strategy meeting, Ethan drove alone to a quiet neighborhood gallery owned by an elderly artist named Samuel Green, a man Claire had once admired during one of their afternoon walks. Samuel welcomed him politely, but looked surprised. Mr. Carter, what brings you here? Ethan glanced around the modest gallery filled with local paintings and handmade sculptures. I need your help. Samuel folded his arms with quiet curiosity. What kind of help? Ethan reached into his leather briefcase and carefully removed a photograph he had secretly taken weeks earlier while Claire had been sketching in the park. Beside it, he placed one of the illustrations she had once given him as a joke, a simple drawing of a coffee cup with smiling eyes. Samuel studied the artwork for several long moments before looking back at Ethan. She has real talent. Ethan smiled faintly. I know. Does she know? Ethan lowered his eyes. Not yet. Samuel leaned against the gallery counter. So what exactly are you asking me to do? Ethan answered without hesitation. I do not want to buy her forgiveness. He took a slow breath. I want the world to see what I saw the very first night we met. I want people to know the artist before they ever hear my name." As Samuel quietly nodded, the first pieces of a plan began falling into place, not one built with wealth alone, but with the truth Ethan should have offered from the very beginning. 3 weeks passed without a single conversation between them. Chicago slowly settled into early summer, and Claire convinced herself that life had finally returned to normal. She worked her shifts, walked home with her sketchbook tucked beneath her arm, and spent quiet evenings trying to draw again, but every page seemed unfinished. Every face somehow reminded her of Ethan. One Friday afternoon, Mrs. Donnelly hurried into the cafe holding an elegant cream-colored envelope. "Claire, someone dropped this off for you." Claire wiped her hands on her apron before accepting it. There was no return address, only her name written in careful handwriting. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a simple invitation printed on thick white paper. "You are warmly invited to the opening night of a local exhibition celebrating emerging artists. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Green Gallery. Admission by invitation only." There was no mention of Ethan, no mention of Carter Dynamics, no mention of billionaires or foundations. Curious, Claire decided to go. The following evening she arrived wearing the same pale blue dress she had worn on the night everything began. Green Gallery stood quietly on a tree-lined street, its warm lights glowing through tall windows. Soft piano music drifted outside as guests wandered through the entrance carrying quiet conversations instead of cameras. Claire stepped inside and immediately noticed something unusual. The gallery walls displayed dozens of pencil sketches and watercolor illustrations. Elderly couples holding hands. Children feeding pigeons in a city square. A bus driver smiling at sunrise. A musician beneath an awning. Every piece celebrated ordinary people living ordinary moments. Visitors moved slowly from one artwork to another, reading small descriptions beneath each frame. Claire stopped in front of the first drawing, and her breath caught. She knew every pencil stroke, every shadow, every line. It was hers. She hurried to the next wall, then the next. Every illustration belonged to her. Some she remembered drawing years ago. Others had remained forgotten inside old sketchbooks she had nearly thrown away. Her heart raced as confusion gave way to disbelief. How is this possible? Because someone believed these deserved to be seen. Claire turned toward the familiar voice. Samuel Green stood beside her with a gentle smile. "Mr. Green." He nodded warmly. "Good evening, Claire." She looked around the gallery once more. "These are my drawings." "Yes." "Who did this?" Samuel did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a folded exhibition brochure. Across the front, in elegant lettering, appeared only 4 words. The world through Claire's eyes. There was no corporate logo, no sponsor's name, no photograph of Ethan. She opened the brochure. Inside, one short message appeared beneath the exhibition title. "Every masterpiece begins with someone who simply chooses to see people with kindness." Claire felt tears gathering before she even reached the signature at the bottom. It read only one word. "Ethan." Samuel quietly spoke while she continued reading. "He asked me not to tell you until tonight." Claire looked up slowly. "He bought the gallery?" Samuel smiled and gently shook his head. "No. He tried." Claire blinked in surprise. Samuel laughed softly. "I refused." "Why?" "Because this was never supposed to be about his money." He looked around at the visitors, studying her work with genuine admiration. "So he agreed to do it my way." Samuel explained that Ethan had spent days contacting small collectors who had purchased Claire's illustrations at neighborhood art fairs years earlier. He tracked down old sketchbooks she had left on consignment, paid every owner fair market value without revealing why, and personally asked permission to borrow each piece for one evening. No artwork had been purchased from Claire without her knowledge. Nothing had been taken away from her. Everything would be returned after the exhibition unless she chose otherwise. Claire listened in stunned silence. "He never asked anyone to advertise his company," Samuel continued. "He never invited the press. He only said one thing." Samuel smiled gently before repeating Ethan's exact words. "If people leave remembering my name, then I failed. If they leave remembering hers, then I finally did something right." Claire slowly turned toward the final room of the gallery. Hanging alone beneath a warm spotlight was the sketch she had drawn on the bridge beside the Chicago River. Next to it, inside a simple wooden frame, rested a handwritten note in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. I spent my life believing people admired success. Then I met an artist who quietly admired kindness instead. I should have trusted that from the very beginning. I cannot erase the truth I failed to tell, but I hope this gallery tells one truth I never stopped believing. The world deserves to see what I saw every time you open your sketchbook. Claire held the note with trembling hands, finally understanding that for the first time in his life, Ethan had chosen not to use his wealth to impress someone, but to quietly lift another person's dream higher than his own. Claire stood in front of the final sketch for what felt like hours, even though only minutes had passed. Around her, guests continued admiring the exhibition, unaware that the woman quietly wiping tears from her eyes was the artist whose work had touched every wall in the gallery. She carefully folded Ethan's handwritten note and slipped it inside her sketchbook before looking toward Samuel. "Where is he?" Samuel smiled gently. "He told me that if you came tonight, the decision should belong to you." Claire frowned slightly. "What decision?" Samuel nodded toward the back courtyard beyond the gallery. "Whether you wanted to walk through that door." Claire took one slow breath before making her way across the gallery. Every step felt strangely familiar, as though she were walking toward the answer to a question that had followed her for weeks. She pushed open the glass door and stepped into the quiet courtyard. Tiny string lights hung above a peaceful garden filled with flowering trees and stone pathways. Ethan stood alone near a small fountain, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. He looked up the moment he heard the door open. For several seconds, neither of them moved. There were no photographers, no reporters, no executives, just two people who had once shared an ordinary dinner that had changed everything. Ethan broke the silence first. "Thank you for coming." Claire looked around the peaceful garden before answering softly. "Thank you for believing in my work." He smiled faintly. "I always did." She slowly walked closer until only a few feet separated them. "Samuel told me what you did." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I needed to show you something." "You did." She held up the exhibition brochure. "But why not put your company's name on it? Everyone else would have." Ethan shook his head. "Because I spent too much of my life putting my name where it did not belong." He met her eyes again. "This was never supposed to be about me." Claire studied him quietly. He looked different now. Not because he was wearing a tailored suit, but because the confidence that usually surrounded him had been replaced by simple honesty. Ethan reached into his jacket and carefully unfolded a familiar restaurant receipt, slightly wrinkled from being carried for weeks. Claire recognized it immediately. It was the receipt from the night they had accidentally shared dinner. "You kept it?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "I almost threw it away that night." He looked down at the faded paper. "Now I think it might be the most valuable thing I own." Claire laughed softly through her tears. Ethan continued. "You once told me that character is who comes home after work." He paused. "I realized I never gave you the chance to know mine completely." He took a slow breath. "I cannot change the way we met. I cannot erase the truth I kept from you. But if you ever decide to start over, there will be no more half answers. No more hidden names. No more pretending to be anyone except myself." Claire remained silent for a long moment before opening her sketchbook. She turned carefully through the pages until she reached the final portrait she had once refused to show him. Beneath the drawing appeared the sentence she had written weeks earlier. "The kindest man I have ever met." She handed the sketchbook to Ethan. "I almost tore this page out." Ethan looked up. "Why?" "Because after the gala, I thought maybe I had imagined the person I drew." Ethan gently closed the sketchbook. "Did you?" Claire smiled through quiet tears and slowly shook her head. "No." She stepped one pace closer. "I think I met both versions of you." Ethan waited without speaking. One of them was afraid that people only wanted his success. She reached for his hand. The other one stopped believing money could fix everything. Their fingers intertwined naturally. "I like the second one much better." A year later, the small neighborhood studio on Clark Street displayed a simple wooden sign that read Claire Bennett Illustration Studio. Inside, children's books, watercolor prints, and community art classes filled every room with life. One wall held a framed bookmark painted with a tiny lighthouse. Another displayed the first invitation to the world through Claire's eyes. On a warm autumn evening, Ethan and Claire returned to the same restaurant where everything had begun. They requested table 12 without explaining why. As dessert arrived, Ethan quietly placed 3 things on the table: the faded dinner receipt, the watercolor bookmark, and a small velvet ring box. Claire laughed softly before covering her mouth in surprise. Ethan smiled with the same gentle expression she had first seen on the night of their mistake. The first time we met, you sat at the wrong table. He opened the ring box. Would you spend the rest of your life sitting beside the right person? Tears filled Claire's eyes as she nodded. Yes. Months later, surrounded by family, close friends, and local artists instead of celebrities, they exchanged vows beneath soft lights in the same gallery where Claire's dream had first been given room to breathe. Above the entrance hung one final framed sentence that every guest paused to read before entering. Sometimes the most beautiful love story begins with nothing more than one empty chair and one wonderfully mistaken hello.